Hello there. In this video, I'm discussing whether rules lawyers ruin games. Hello iOS fans, Robin here, back with a Shatterpoint / discussion video with you. I've been covering Shatterpoint in my own inimitable fashion over the last few weeks, and I have to say I've run aground a little bit. Loads of people have got the game out there and I haven't, and I'm just feeling very jealous. But also, not really, I am feeling very jealous, but really, I kind of, the transmissions are coming, but I just kind of feel like with everybody out there playing the game, my content is perhaps less interesting right now. I'm only able to contribute stuff in the theoretical and not the practical, so I'm kind of waiting for my copy. It feels like it's going to be forever, and then we'll pick it up, I'll play some games, and then maybe I'll start making some proper content. One thing I have kind of noticed through reading the rules and reading the rules interactions on the forums, that I've been wondering, and it's not the first time I've wondered this, I've talked about it before, but I can't help feeling like sometimes we don't help ourselves. Our tendency as gamers, as war gamers, to rules lawyer things is kind of, does it ruin the games for us? And more importantly, does it ruin the games for other people coming into the game, into the hobby? Are we actually inadvertently, or maybe advertently in some cases, gatekeeping the hobby? Having read quite a lot of the Shatterpoint rules over the past few weeks and compare and contrasted, I just sometimes wonder whether we don't just make this much harder for ourselves than we need to. And I really feel that as well, reading Underworld sometimes the Underworld's cards are so complicated to decipher, purely because they're written, I think, in this kind of English language way to try and lock everything down. So the examples I've really thought of was when I was looking at the abilities cards for Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi in my previous video. So for Maul, for example, has force speed. Each character in this unit may move. Okay, fair enough. Maul's the only person in this character. It does say each character in this unit, but why not just say Maul can move? There is no place to choose a character in this unit and an enemy character within 3 of that character. So it's like, choose Maul, anybody within 3 of him can do something. Pull the chosen enemy character 2 towards the chosen ally character, Maul again, then the chosen enemy character gains exposed. It just seems like, you know, we've got Maul is referred to a character in this unit. He's then he's referred to as an allied character. It just feels a bit uncomfortable. And similarly, Obi-Wan, hello there, is an ability. One character in this unit may jump. If it does, that character adds 3 to its next attack roll. Again, it's like Obi-Wan can jump. If he does, he can add 3. So uncivilized, when a character in this unit is targeted by a range attack, this unit may use this ability. So when Obi-Wan is targeted by this ability, he can use this ability. This unit, Obi-Wan, gains a hunger token after the attack is received. If the attack roll contains 1 or more missed results, the attacking unit suffers 3 damage. Well, okay, yeah, I mean, I understand why it's written that way. It's kind of future-proofing it because maybe somebody might add to the unit later and down the line, so they've called it this unit. But I just feel like it's very overly complicated. It doesn't need to be this hard. Doesn't need to be written in general terms. These are very specific characters, and I feel like if I was new to this game and I was like, well, what does Obi-Wan do? One character in this unit, if he does, that character goes, what's that mean? What's the unit? It just feels to me like we're making it more difficult for ourselves, and like I say, stopping people who want to come into the hobby from coming into the hobby, purely because we're kind of obfuscating with semantics, he says, obfuscating with long big words. I suppose, I mean, a lot of this is written to future-proof the rules, as I said. So if you want to be able to make sure they're nicely, tightly clad, so that people can't rules lawyer it. This doesn't really feel like that. It doesn't really feel particularly future-proofing. It doesn't really feel like it changes any rules lawyering. If anything, it makes it slightly worse because, you know, Obi-Wan is pretty unequivocal. I suppose they might say, well, we might have other Obi-Wans down the line. They're called Obi-Wan, therefore, if it says this Obi-Wan, you know. But and this is where the other thing comes in. Okay, if it was because there might be an enemy Obi-Wan or a friendly Obi-Wan or a different Obi-Wan somehow on the board that would affect them, you kind of, this is because we as players will try and argue that. I say we, most of us don't, but a lot of people do. You know, we might try and argue that, and it's kind of like trying to stop these kind of silly arguments before they've even happened, which a lot of the time doesn't need to be done, in my opinion. When I first started playing Underworlds, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun game. It is a fun game. But when I started then playing it, we started making videos for it, and then we became part of the community. And I hadn't played a lot of these games for a long time, and I discovered there were endless arguments over rules as written versus rules as intended, which is one of the sort of classic war game miniatures games arguments about things. And some of these arguments were legitimate, but some of them really weren't. They were clearly twisting the obvious, really clearly trying to read something into the rules that clearly wasn't there. I remember there was one to do with board placement for Underworlds, which was just a ridiculous thing. And then there was this other thing that people would say, well, it doesn't say I can't do that, and therefore I can do it, which is something I never really understood. There's lots of things it says you can't. There's lots of things it doesn't say you can't do. It doesn't, for example, say you can reach over the table and punch your opponent in the face. It doesn't say that, but one would sort of hope it was implied. But I kind of feel like it's to do with failures in the English language. Wittgenstein said, the world we see is defined and given meaning by the words we choose. So the world we see is defined and given by the meaning of the words we choose. And I feel like this really applies to tabletop games. I mean, if that applied to the real world, then it doubly applies to tabletop world, because I feel like Wittgenstein would love to hang out in the rules forums for games, because he would totally find out how sort of relative interpretation of the English language there, or language there, to describe different things. Take line of sight rules, for example. Line of sight rules in every game seem to be a bone of contention. They're continually argued over with, they're tinkered about all the time. For me, I feel like it'd be much simpler if we were just given some loose guidelines and opponents just agreed what they thought was best. And we look at the cover rules for Shatterpoint, they're causing endless discussion about whether they make any sense or not, and people argue about them, people get very confused by them. Actually, they are quite simple, but people get very confused about them because I think war games obviously are trying to portray something very complicated in a very simple way. They're trying to convert complicated real phenomena into abstract situations on the board. Your model is basically a fixed pose model with his feet nailed to the ground, which doesn't really lend itself to dynamic combat. The model itself doesn't literally take damage, but don't drop off it when it's fighting. So the tabletop, to paraphrase Wittgenstein, is very much defined by the words we choose. And even with good intentions, I think it's possible to misinterpret those rules due to the flexibility of the English language, or whatever language you're playing in. I've really found that there are times in Underworlds when we played, when Pete and I have both completely interpreted something completely different, same words, and we've both thought, when we talked, because we get these things in advance quite often, we talk about what they mean, and quite often one of us say, well, that isn't what that means, or the other one, oh, I think you're wrong, or I think you're right. So it is really easy to make those kind of interpretive mistakes. So I understand why it's important to try and have a strong codified set of rules. I just feel like we as a group then make it harder for ourselves by arguing the toss over certain interpretations where the interpretation is a bit loose. I don't feel like that happens in board games in the same way. It may be that I just sit around and play board games in a slightly more relaxed atmosphere. It may be the sheer number of moving parts in war games, and also war games need to be future-proof. So if you get a board game, pretty much you put the board game down and you play it, and everybody's playing to the same set of rules. For games like Shatterpoint, they know the game is going to evolve, they know new characters are going to evolve the rules, so the rules are going to be constantly changing, and therefore they need to try and nail down or lock in the rules so that they can't be upset and altered or abused by later additions to the game. I feel like war games have a bit of a social contract thing going on as well. That doesn't quite seem to exist in the same way as in war games. I think generally in a board game, not always, but generally in a board game, you're all playing to the same rules. So if one of you starts interpreting the rules in a slightly advantageous way to yourself, then probably everybody's going to have the same advantage. So there's less mileage in trying to eke out an advantage, because it's everybody's advantage, because that's the way board game rules work. Not always, but that's the way board game rules tend to work. Whereas I often feel like, I felt this for a long time, in a war game, I feel like it's trying to find that advantage purely for yourself, because you're playing your faction, which your opponent isn't playing. I feel like, and this might be unfair, but I feel like looking from afar, I don't play competitive war games, but looking from afar, it feels like winning a war game is about exploiting gaps in the rules, or things that don't quite work or haven't quite been married out, or little things that the developer hasn't thought of, rather than actually playing to the rules. But in reality, of course, most of us do adhere to that social contract. I imagine if I sat down with 90% of people, probably, well, you're all lovely who watch this video, but 99% of people watching this video, certainly the ones who like it, the ones who thumb down, maybe not, but they do adhere to that social contract. So if we sat down, we would perhaps talk about a raw situation, and we go, oh yeah, well that's fine, we'll play it that way today, or whatever. And I feel like social media amplifies the voices of the occurrences where we don't do that, because you can spitball rules interactions around in a fairly safe environment, and you can sort of make slightly outlandish predictions or changes to the rules, if you like, in a sort of safe-ish space where you haven't got to sit down. I think if you sat down opposite the table, you probably just sort of agree with whatever, just so you can actually play the game. So I find on social media, people are more than happy to chat about how they can leverage an advantage, or indeed, for themselves, or indeed just say exactly why their opponent cannot leverage that advantage, which they wouldn't do if they were sat down opposite the table with them, or in a friendly club atmosphere. Now, that all said, it doesn't really solve very much, does it? Because it's not going to change things. I know that a lot of manufacturers do use professional rules checkers. I've seen them on Twitter talking about that, and you might therefore hopefully avoid some of the more glaring language fails. I do feel like actually the Shatterpoint rulebook has got some quite overly verbose wordage for things that doesn't quite make sense, and it could have done with being a bit tighter. But I feel like, to be fair to those guys, when they're writing the rules, they're writing for an audience who's going to try and whatever they've force a little climbing pickaxe type thing into every crevice in the rule book and crack into those rules rights and crack them open and break them effectively. So no wonder they try and make their rules to be as impenetrable as possible. Is there a solution? I don't know. I suspect most of you say, Robin, actually it's not a problem because I just play with my mates and we'll agree if we don't agree. If we don't particularly agree with a rule, then we might house rule it. The cover rules, Shatterpoint, a classic thing here. A lot of people will say, well, I'm not going to play it like that. And I think most people, even in a competitive environment, will just sit down and go, okay, well, that's not how I thought it was, but I can see your point of view and we'll roll for it, or I'm going to agree with you this time and we'll play it that way. And I think most people are like that. I don't think it's ever going to change. I just feel like the audience that it's writing for and the people who are writing it are going to keep getting these kind of overly verbose, overly long sentences and slightly confusing. It's meant to clarify things, but they don't really. Kind of this unit rather than using the actual names, that kind of thing. I think it's just going to carry on. So thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about rules lawyering. I just feel like at the end of the day, it makes everything just a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. I mean, I've had to deal with lawyers quite a lot in the recent years, and I'm married to one actually, but if they can make something more complicated and more difficult than it needs to be, then they will. And I just feel that perhaps it would be nice if we didn't have to write for the rules lawyers all the time, but I kind of feel like they're here to stay and there's no getting away from it. I hope you enjoyed this slightly irrelevant video, and let me know what you think, and we'll have some more proper Shatterpoint content coming for you at some point. I should be getting my box in June. Looking forward to painting it all up and playing some games. But until then, please do like and subscribe, all that jazz, and we'll see you soon on the Ages of Sigmar. Bye for now. Bye.